You may not be a pilot or ever be interested in being a pilot, but there are many great lessons from the world of aviation that can help you in business and even in your personal life. And today we're going to look at 5 of the key requirements and standard procedures used by pilots that can be translated into personal life. And why would those things be good to look at? Well, think about how important it is to get things right in aviation. Things like not crashing, things like surviving and not dying. Aviation is a dangerous, or can have danger, and it's also something you want to have good results. Same thing in business. You want to have good results and you want to avoid danger. So if it's important enough for a life or death scenario like flying, these things can be used in your personal life. And here are the 5 examples, and there's many others as well, that you can look at day to day in your business operations and even in your personal life that can help you get more success and avoid danger. The first one is the read back. And in aviation, you've heard pilots on the radio talking about clearances and approvals, and what's called the air traffic control system is what communicates with clients. They give you clearances, they give you approvals to do things like you can take off now, cleared for takeoff, cleared for landing. The communications that are important between pilots and air traffic control require a readback. In fact, cleared for takeoff is one of them. If the controller says cleared for takeoff, you have to say back, cleared for takeoff. That's where you see in the movies they say Roger or copy, which isn't really accurate, but it's an example of that readback. The reason why is because certain things you want to make sure that were heard correctly. And we're going to listen here to an example of what's called a clearance delivery, an IFR clearance. So before a plane takes off, the air traffic control system tells the pilot where they're cleared to go. Take off, go to this altitude, take a left here, go to this place. And the pilot has a clearance, a flight plan clearance that they've filed. And before they take off, the air traffic control will say, here's your clearance. You, as a pilot, have to read it back to the air traffic controller, and they say, read back correct. And it's so important to have all those details right that they require you read it back. If you don't read it back, you will not be cleared for takeoff. So let's take a listen and see how that sounds, and then we'll give an example how to use that in actual everyday life.
Down to Lakeland. Number 23 Mike Zulu, you cleared to the Lakeland Airport via radar vectors to join Victor 157 direct. Maintain 2,000. Expect 5,000 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency will be 118.6, squawk 3231.
23 Mike Zulu is cleared to Lakeland via radar vectors, Victor 157, then direct, 2,000, then 5,010, 118.6, and 3231.
Cessna 23 Mike Zulu, read back correct. Taxi to runway 36.
So you hear the controller gave the instructions for their flight to the pilot. The pilot read them back, word for word, what the frequencies are, what their transponder code is, all the different instructions. It's not important that you understood what they said, but just that the pilot read them back. And then as soon as the pilot read back what his instructions were, the air traffic controller said, read back is correct. You're cleared to taxi to runway 36 to take off. So it's so important that those details are properly understood by the pilot that the pilot actually has to say them back. And it prevents a lot of errors. All of these rules in aviation came from prior bad events, like a crash, that somebody did something wrong. The readback also eliminates misunderstandings. Or maybe you didn't hear it right. Maybe the radio was staticky. Or maybe you thought you heard something and you didn't. Remember that old telephone game where somebody tells a story down the line and by the time it gets back to you, it's completely different. Readback prevents telephone game. So how do you use that in real life? If you say something to somebody, after you say, you can't say, Tell me what you just heard. Make sure you understand me correctly, because it might come off as you're calling him an idiot. But what you can do is use more subtle language. If you tell somebody something important, look, here's what I want you to do. Take this contract, talk to the customer, ask them about their payment information, tell them we're going to set up a meeting at 2 o'clock, and let them know that their partner is invited to the meeting. Right? That's just an example of something you could do. And depending upon the relationship you have with the person in business you're talking to, you might ask them, okay, so those are 4 or 5 steps, or any part of those that were, that I left something out. Did I leave in any gaps? Put it on you. Be a little humble about it. Need any more information on it? Would you like me to explain it more? Okay, so how are you going to present this to the customer? What are the 4 steps? If it's important that you have your person you're dealing with, your employee, your direct report, your business partner, do things in a certain order, make sure that's part of the instructions. Many times errors in business come from doing things in the wrong order. Sometimes it's important to do step A first before step B. And if you don't tell somebody that, they might decide, well, step B is a little easier, so I'll do that first. Or step C is more convenient, so I'll jump ahead to that. Sometimes that will mess up the whole deal. So getting a good read back is important. You got to be careful of the wording, because if you say, what did you hear me just say? That can sound condescending and arrogant. So come up with your own wording, how you want to get that read back done, because eliminating miscommunications, helping the person you're conveying information to understand it, will help both parties, and even the third party that may be involved. How many times did you look at a problem that happened in business, a catastrophe, a disaster, an inconvenience, and realize if the person just did what I told them to, everything would have been okay? Why didn't you listen to what I said? You didn't do what you were told. How many times does that come into your head? Now, whose fault is it if somebody didn't do what they were told? The communicator or the listener? You might say, well, it's the listener. Well, if what you're trying to do as a communicator is to get the listener to do something that helps them, then make sure that the message is very clearly described. Because here's the thing. What you hear in your own head, what you're thinking in your own head, is your own language. Even though we all speak, presumably, English, we may speak other languages in other areas, but if you're talking to somebody in English and they're understanding in English, you might think, well, it's the same language. Well, even within English, there's people that have different understandings of what you might say. Your own internal dialogue has the benefit of the understanding of the model. You know the vision of what you're trying to convey. The other person does not. You've had days, weeks, months of thinking about this vision. They have 30 seconds of you explaining it to them. So remember, there may be details that you didn't include because you thought it was just assumed. Don't even have to tell you about that word. So read back is important. Use that to your advantage. What's another important air traffic control aviation procedure that can help you? One word: unable. ATC stands for air traffic control. You might think that that means that the air traffic controller tells the pilot what to do. They're in charge. They're the boss. They're the controlling authority. That's not true. They're there to separate one plane from another by making them fly in different parts of the sky and making them land at different intervals. But they don't tell the pilot what to do necessarily. They give the pilot guidelines to get done what the pilot wants to do in a safe way. For that reason, if an air traffic controller tells you as a pilot an instruction, a clearance, and it's not safe, you can't do it, it's not even convenient, it's perfectly legitimate to tell that controller, I'm not able to do that. And you can look it up. Unable is a perfect, acceptable response to ATC. One word, unable. Everybody knows what that means. Pilot tells you, or the controller tells you, descend and maintain 2,000, unable. That's all you got to say. The controller will then figure something out. They will find another thing. They might tell you to climb to 5,000. They might tell you to turn right 20 degrees, whatever it is. They're trying to get you out of conflict with another aircraft. That's their best plan for doing that. Their best plan might not match your best plan. So unable is a perfectly good response. Now, you don't want to use it just out of minor inconvenience. It's got to be something pretty serious. How does that translate to real life? Well, a lot of us are people pleasers. Somebody asks us or tells us something to do, we just do it. How many times does that come back to create an annoyance, an inconvenience, a resentment later? How much better would it have been to say unable? Now, because you're not on the radio and you don't need to shorten phrases to keep blocking other radio traffic, you can say more than just unable. You can say, I'm wondering if there's another way to do that. Or that wouldn't be the best thing to do. Is there any other options? Or can we talk about that more? Don't jump right to yes if it's not something that matches what you want to do. Even if it is something that you want to do, you might want to ask more. What's the best, what went into that decision? So not jumping right to yes is a good thing, because if a pilot just accepts whatever clearance or instruction is given to them and it makes them crash, now the pilot's dead. There are many, many instances of flights that ended in disaster because the pilot never thought to say unable or question. There was a woman who was flying a single engine private aircraft in a big area of air traffic control. I believe it was near Austin, might have been Fort Worth. And she was landing at an airport that has commercial flights, big jets, Delta, American. And as she was coming in, she was running a little low on gas, and the controller kept making her go wide, circle around, because these big planes were trying to land, and he was giving her very wide-ranging directions, vectors. And eventually the woman ran out of gas and crashed because she couldn't get to the airport. If at one of the turns she simply said unable or declared an emergency, she'd probably be with us today. So don't be afraid to say unable or to communicate your skepticism about something in the right context with appropriate scenarios. What about the 10,000 foot rule? This is number 3. In aircraft, commercial aircraft procedures, there is a regulation from the FAA that at or below 10,000 feet, takeoffs and landings in that environment, there is no extraneous conversation allowed in the cockpit. Pilots can't chit-chat about the weather, about their job, about their family life, about their pet. They don't like their schedule. You can do that once you're up at cruising altitude and things are more stabilized. In the takeoff and landing environment and below 10,000 feet, where things are a little more hectic and a little more intense, you can only talk about things that are directly related and important to the flight. And the reason for that is because when you need your mental focus on things that are important, and by important I mean life or death, they don't want you diverting yourself or multitasking or becoming distracted by other conversations. How does that connect to your personal life? Well, in business, if you're involved with something that is an important thing, maybe a payroll matter with an employee, maybe a contract with a vendor, maybe some immediate or urgent or time-sensitive response, you can deflect or firewall yourself from other extraneous things. Look, here's a ridiculous example, but it tells you what we're talking about. If there is a customer that represents a $100,000 contract to your company, and that customer has called in and they want some details on the proposal sent to them within an hour and a half, you're below 10,000 feet. And at the same time, your HR person comes in and wants you to give some information on planning the Christmas party. You need to firewall that off. It's also it's kind of a procedure related to unable. You want to make sure that you're focusing your attention on the thing that is most important right then. So think about that 10,000 foot rule. Below 10,000 feet, pilots don't chit-chat about the weather. They don't chit-chat about their pet or their family. They focus on the task at hand. So there's certain times in business when you want to be focused on that one thing. One of the things that happens a lot now is with Zoom calls and remote conversations. It's very easy to be doing something else on another screen. You're on a Zoom call with somebody, sales conversation, and you're checking your email. Maybe you're looking at some business stats or KPIs. It's easy to do because you're not face to face with that person. But that distraction could be the difference between you nailing down that deal and maybe not having that extra revenue. So focus is the name of the game. What about check-in? Check-in is at the beginning of every conversation between air traffic control, between two aircraft. You start with a certain procedure. You say who you're calling, you say who you are, and you say where you are. You might say, Dallas Tower, this is November 1234 X-ray, 5 miles to the south, 5,000 feet. And they'll respond back, and then you have your conversation. By starting with identifying who you are and where you are and who you're calling, it starts the conversation out properly. So how to use that in real life? In business, it's real simple. When you talk to somebody, you introduce yourself. Bob, my name is Dave. I'm here to talk to you about this. It's also very good to say the other person's name first, because that's what they want to hear. They want to know that they're heard and recognized. In air traffic control, it's important because they want to know who you're calling for the same reason. They want to be heard. So if you're going to talk to a client, a customer, an employee, a potential vendor, if you start by saying even the name of their company. If they call you up and you see the caller ID, or you had a call schedule with somebody and it's XYZ Corp. Hey, XYZ Corp, how's it going? This is Dave. We're here to talk about whatever. It sets the tone. It also establishes you as being in charge of the process, which is where you want to be. So checking in a very certain way every time. Now, obviously, you're not going to introduce yourself to somebody you know, like an employee. If your controller walks into the office, you're not going to say, hey, Bob, this is Dave. They know who you are, right? But you're going to say their name first to recognize them. Hey, Bob, I see you're here in my office. What can we talk about today? Use the same philosophy, not necessarily word for word. And the last thing is a checklist partner. When a plane is in various phases of flight, there's many checklists. Takeoff checklist, landing checklist, cruising checklist, taxi checklist, all kind of checklists. If there's an emergency, there's a checklist for that too. And the way a checklist is done in a commercial plane is one person does the checklist, the other person does the actual activities. So one person would say, set flaps to 10. Flaps to 10. Check. The checklist person says, landing light on. Landing light on. Check. Now you have two people making sure it gets all done. One of them is focusing on getting through the list. The other one is focusing on executing. So that way the person thinking about the list isn't distracted. You're not multitasking. It's related to the 10,000 foot rule. One person is focusing on getting the list done. The other person is focusing on doing the things on the list. And in between each of those communications, they acknowledge it. Landing light on, check. That's a readback. So we're back to where we started with readback. But having a checklist partner can be valuable to make sure nothing gets lost to the cracks. How to use that in business? Suppose you are working on a project with a proposal to a client for a big, new piece of business. Let's say it's a $200,000 contract over the course of 2 years. And the proposal is going to have the pricing, it's going to have a little spreadsheet. It's going to have a contract. It's going to have the payment terms. It's going to have some features and benefits for the client. You're going to go over the meeting, what time it's going to happen, who's going to say what. So one person might say, okay, I'm going to go through the contract to make sure we have everything. This person requested pricing. We got that? Check. We have that. Do you have the signature page? Yep, we have that. Check. We have the meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock. That's checked. Do we have lunch order for the meeting? That's checked. By having two people do it, one of them focusing on making sure the big picture is done, one person focusing on each thing, now you're less likely to forget a detail. And even if that detail is not mission critical to the meeting, it might be mission critical to the perception of the client, to how good you are, how organized you are. So having a checklist partner for everything that's important, even if you do it internally, you might want to go to a colleague and say, look, I'm going through this thing. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Let me go through what I'm trying to do, and you can tell me what you see. Okay, this is what I want to do. Check. And go back and forth. So to review the 5 things from aviation that you can use in business, number 1 is the read back. Something's important, say it to the other person, make sure they answer back and acknowledge that they understood exactly what you said. Number 2 is unable. Don't jump to yes immediately. Make sure that it's something you really want to and can do. Number 3 is 10,000 foot rule. If you're in a mission critical phase of the day, workflow, don't get distracted with other things. Don't try to multitask when one of the things is very important. You can multitask. There's plenty of times when multitasking is okay. Don't believe the hype that you can't multitask. Certainly you can, and certainly you do. Everybody does. But when it's something that is absolutely crucial to get done right, don't multitask. Number 4 is the check-in. When you engage with somebody in conversation, communication, say their name. Make sure that you're not only identifying yourself. If they already know you, you're not going to identify your name, but just establish yourself. Hey, Bob, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a long time. Me and you go way back. Or the proposal you sent the other day was good. What are we talking about today? Who they are, what you're all about, what are you doing right now? Check in. Last is having a checklist partner, where if something's important and you want to make sure all the details are covered, have another pair of eyes. Have a redundant person look at things and make sure all the steps are covered. And even sometimes going through that checklist will help both people understand the reason for each thing and maybe adding a few more details. Hopefully that helps. Look for other videos about taking things from other crucial industries and making it useful for your own business, professional success, or your personal life.